Alright, Travis Wingoodsell. Let's get to the requested video by one of my commenters last night on the Egyptian origin of the LDS temple rituals. He only wanted to know the ancient practice. He's a critic of the church, so he doesn't believe in the church, but I'll tie it to the church to show you how the church is strayed. In the Book of Mormon, 1 Nephi chapter 1 verse 2, we are informed of the particular religion Mormons are supposed to be. Those who receive the Book of Mormon, who read, ponder, and pray, are supposed to go, oh, yeah, I want to be pre-captivity Jew. Where do I sign up? Yeah, Mormons don't believe that, do they? Learning of the Jews' language of the Egyptians. The Jews are set in the Book of Mormon as pre-captivity Jews, right at the time of becoming captivity Jews, and before the Bible was written, post-captivity. And as Mormons, we aren't taught that. We're taught Jesus Christ is the same Jesus from the gospel narratives. And no. No. And we are also taught that the Egyptian documents are the source origin for our learning of the Jews' Mormonism. And so that has not been explained to anybody. So yeah, this is all brand new. Another exclusive to add to the list that I already put in there, but I said I'd do this video. In the video I did this morning. And so, to understand, Christians are going to be shocked and horrified, because all the Gospels are a recreation of the Egyptian documents, just with a Greek character named Jesus instead of Amen. In Isaiah, you shall call his name Amen El, sun god of the Egyptians. And in Matthew he says, he quotes a prophet, doesn't call him Isaiah, and then goes on to quote the passage in Isaiah, and then says Joseph of Arimathea then named him Jesus, in violation of the prophecy. So yeah, there are lots of problems with the Gospels, just because they're even further from the origin source of Egyptian, even more so than the Old Testament of the Bible, which is post-captivity when it was written. And so all scholarship are looking in Israel for their theorized original documents in Hebrew. They're never going to find them. They're in Egyptian. They're right there. They've been there the whole time. King David was a composite of multiple kings of the 18th dynasty of Egypt. Well, wait a minute. The Egyptian dynasty had their capital and the throne for their pharaohs in Egypt, not Jerusalem. Yeah, but Jerusalem was a tributary of Egypt, at least after David Moses IV did a campaign and battled the Hyksos, not the Hyksos, the Hittites. I saw a YouTube video from Canada, CBC, Canadian Broadcast Central, or Central, whatever it's titled, an acronym for, about a discovery found in the Turkey region where the Hittites were originated from, and they found out that it was a queen. And so the scholars are all saying, oh, we're going to have to reevaluate ancient history because we'd always assumed our current patriarchal system on the ancients. Women had more liberties and freedoms and powers than we realized, as we've been covering up. Yeah. So lots of things, when you actually do research, are discovered. Romans 16, by the way, when you translate it correctly, Phoebe was a deacon, and Genea was an apostle comparable to Paul. Not a 12 apostle. They only had the one replacement, and then they all started getting assassinated. Weren't able to replace their 12. But different story, different subject, dealing with how the current Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints thinks they're supposed to be the true successors because of the keys of King Peter, James, and John rather than Moses. Moses is a story about the ancient Egyptian records as well, from the 18th dynasty even. Moses, David Moses. In Egyptian, they pronounce it Tawut Moseh. So when you read in the Bible, into Genesis, they first talk about heaven and earth being created, and the sky, or the heavens are created with the separating of the waters from the waters, and dry land rises up from the base of the waters, which is the same exact pattern for Noah and the flood, and Moses parting the Red Sea, and Joshua parting the Jordan River. Yeah, it's all about the Egyptian afterlife. But also the main central theme of the Egyptian culture and religion, that of childbirth of the Messiah of the latter days to restore the kingdom. And so if there are any mothers out there, yeah, the baby is immersed in water inside your womb. The water then breaks and out pops the baby. And that's all the same pattern. I've gone over how Egyptian petroglyphs are to be translated at multiple levels of translation. I just went over several of them with just the one Heliopolis creation petroglyph. I'm expecting to have that put first in this video for you, because that's where we start. And you have in the petroglyph Nut, who is heaven, Geb, who is earth, being separated by their father Shu. And so each one of them are Egyptian words. Nut, heaven; Geb, earth; Shu, air. So when you get to chapter 2 of Genesis, all scholars make the big mistake of assuming it's a different text that is being pieced together to compose the Bible. Same Egyptian petroglyph. The Heliopolis creation glyph. They're just continuing on, just with a different translation of the same petroglyph. And what you have with the creation of mankind, Adam, Geb, Adam in Hebrew is soil. And so when you want to distinguish soil from Adam, you just add an H, the hay, at the end of it, to feminize it and refer to it as soil. And the alphabet Ben Sira, if you're familiar with him, from 600 AD, he explained how the two creations of mankind figured into the biblical text by calling Lilith the first wife of Adam. Lilith is the word for not night, because there's darkness, the word for darkness, and the darkness became called night. Night, I believe, is Lilith. Maybe I should check to confirm, but I'm pretty sure that the word for darkness is not Lilith. Lila, technically. Lilith, with the T at the end, just makes it Egyptian. That's the T is the grammatical termination for feminine singular. All right, Blue Letter Bible. Genesis 1. And then we change the text to Westminster Leningrad Codex. All right. And yeah, Lila. There's Lila. And darkness called night. Yep. Yeah, there's called, proclaimed, and then Lila, night. And so that's where Lilith comes from, even though she's mentioned in the Talmud. I'm not sure of both Talmuds, but at least the Babylonian. And so that's where they tried to explain that situation. But the same thing. Nut is Lilith, Nut is Eve. And they're the same person. It's just the Hebrew Bible chose to rename them using Hebrew names rather than Egyptian. And so when man is created in verse 2 or chapter 2, you have moisture, then you have the breath of life. Now people say, oh, we're going to impose Ta, who sculpts them, also Khnum, the sculptor of mankind. Yeah, okay, but the story is still sticking with the Heliopolis creation glyph, though it's clear he does understand that ancient belief. And so Shu is the breath of life, Heavenly Father, and Heavenly Mother is Tefnut, the moisture. And so when you see the Genesis chapter 2 verse 4 these are the generations which genealogy, human biological offspring of heaven and earth. Well, yeah, Nut and Geb. They're human. And they have children. And that's what we get into, is the same as in the Bible. They follow the exact same story from Egyptian. And so who are the first two boys talked about in the Bible? Cain, Abel. The first two boys talked about in Egyptian, Osiris and Set. Asher and Seth. the story in the Bible takes a twist because Abel was not over the flocks, he was over the vegetation, whereas Cain is over vegetation instead. That's been turned around. But Abel is murdered by his brother Cain, just as Set murders Osiris. And notice how Adam and Eve then have a replacement child rather than having Cain take over the kingdom as the birthright blessing son, the usurper of the kingdom through murder. That pattern of usurpation of the younger brother taking over the throne. They have Cain set up as the older brother, though. He's the younger one. And so this is how you can correct the Bible, is going to the Egyptian documents, say, oh, okay, Abel's supposed to be the older brother, he's the guy in charge, and then you start realizing, oh, okay, yeah, that's why his offering wasn't accepted, blah, blah, blah. And correct all the nonsense that have created mythologies in Mormonism and false doctrines, false theologies. And so let's stop here. I'll put the current information up, and then I'll put the next picture of the assassination of Osiris. Notice how the sacrament of the Lord's Supper is the full title. Catholics have multiple sacraments. Mormons only have one. So when a Mormon says sacrament, that's what they're referring to as the Lord's Supper. That the bread is broken in remembrance of the body of Christ. Broken bread, which was shed for us. Shed? You mean murdered? Yeah. So, does the Gospel's Jesus have his bones broken? Is his body shed, or does he give his life willingly? Yeah. The Gospel's Jesus is not the right God. And the wine, which is supposed to be red wine for the symbolism of the blood that was shed. It comes back to Osiris and Set. And so that is the first part of the ritual, is that you're reenacting the life, murder, resurrection, and ascension, burial, death and burial, of Osiris. That's what the whole temple rituals are about. And the coronation of the successor. And so baptism, I've already gone over that, haven't I? Baptism is in remembrance of the death, burial, and resurrection. Well, immersion is baptism, buried under the water and raised up again. But it also has to do with childbirth, as I went over, and the birth of the successor to the deceased father. And in the story, in Egyptian, as Osiris's body parts are recovered by the servants of Isis, the wife of Osiris, And so there you have missionary work with the gathering of the elect, the children of God, from the four quarters of the earth back to Zion, Heliopolis, the city of the sun. You have that in the sacrament as well. You have the scattered members of the church gathering at a church rather than the temple and partaking of the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, in which the emblems of the broken bread in remembrance of the broken body, the scattering of Israel, the gathering of Israel, as the gathered Israel partakes of the bread, internalizing it into themselves, becoming the successors to the throne, in remembrance of the one who is to be the successor of the throne from among the membership. Completely different doctrine, isn't it? We'd all believe that Jesus is outside of humanity, comes into humanity, and then goes back outside of humanity to come back to restore what he failed to restore when he came into humanity the first time, calling it a second coming. No. It's the first coming. It's the gathered Israel. And notice in the church, who has the keys of the gathering? Moses. Given to who? Joseph Smith. Where? Kirtland Temple. When? During Passover. That Exodus story, where Moses takes the house of Israel to the promised land, parting the waters, and the dry land appears as they walk on the dry land into the promised land, just like childbirth, conception, childbirth. This is all part and parcel of the temple rituals. Too bad Christianity thinks that temple worship is no longer needed and is just a heathen practice. Too bad. How's that second coming? And so baptism is the first step of the ritual in the likeness of the Christ who was Osiris. Christ is anointed, and those who are kings are anointed. In Hebrew, they're messiahs. Move this back, twist this up. There we go. And so in the likeness. So at baptism, notice that Joseph Smith had set it up that our covenant for baptism is that we are willing to take upon ourselves the name of Christ. We don't take upon ourselves the name of Christ yet. We don't become Christ yet. Both men and women, notice. Isn't that interesting? The ancients gave more liberties and power to women than they did during some apostasy time period. Patriarchal dominance suppressed women. And there were two versions of the death of Osiris. The first was tricking Osiris to come to a party, and Set held a contest to see who could fit in the coffin. And Osiris was the only one who fit in the coffin, and Set nailed it shut, and he and his servants set it afloat on the Nile, and it went up to the Babel of Tower of Babel fame, not of Babylon. And there it beached in a cedar of Lebanon, there in Babel, sprouted and grew into a cedar tree, the mighty cedar tree of Lebanon. And then Ezekiel picks up that prophecy when it talks about the Messiah coming from the top of the cedar tree in Babel. And so the servants of Isis, in this case, went out, recovered the coffin, brought it back to Egypt. And then Set found out, and that's when he chopped up the body into 14 pieces. Other texts say 42, depending on the meaning of the text. Different stories, different petroglyphs have different meanings and intentions to be taught to people. But it's 14. And so the 12 tribes of Israel come from this. Joseph is given a double portion, Ephraim and Manasseh. There's 13. And then there's somebody missing. Jacob had another child that is not mentioned as one of the 13 tribes of Israel, because she's female. She's Dinah, raped by the Shechemites, people of Shechem. And so then Simeon and plots to get them to have a treaty between the two of them for having raped Dinah, and says, well, as part of the treaty, you guys have to be circumcised. And again, if you don't understand circumcision, that's allowing the crown to rise, just like the story, the dry land rising from the waters. And so while they were groaning and moaning in severe pain, they then, the few brothers, vengeful brothers, came in and slaughtered them. And so when the servants returned the 14 pieces of Osiris's body from the four quarters of the earth, Isis, having priesthood power as a female, assembles the body back together, but there's a piece missing. Different stories tell what happened to it in different ways. Some say a fish ate it, but that's not the point. The point is not to explain the story. The point is to understand the symbolism of the story. It's not supposed to make literal sense in all cases. And so she then fashions the male appendage, and again, depending on the story, she either conceives a child the natural way, or she turns into a bird, hovers above, and immaculately conceives. The immaculate conception is more likely because of the battle between Horus, the child of Isis and Osiris, and Set to restore the kingdom. I think we're at that. No, I need to cover. Set found out that Isis had restored Osiris, but Osiris was buried in the tomb for 3.5 days, and raised from the tomb, and then ascended into heaven. Sound familiar? Yeah, that part's familiar, isn't it? And so Isis, pregnant with her child, has to flee into the wilderness. Now in Egypt, the wilderness used to be a wilderness, jungle wilderness. But then there was a flood that occurred, and you can still see the evidence of that flood in the Giza pyramids. Now this confuses Egyptologists and archaeologists, because archaeologists say that a worldwide flood did not occur until 10,500 BCE. Now, if the Giza pyramids were not built until the Old Kingdom, how do you explain the flood evidence on the Giza pyramids? There have been those who understood astronomy, in that the North Star changes position, and when it changes position, the constellations do some alteration as well, and about every can't remember the exact time frame, have to look it up, but they found out that during the time of the flood that archaeologists talk about for the earth, and back in 12,000 BCE, the Milky Way corresponded exactly with the 3 stars of Orion to the Giza pyramids in the Nile River. And so the obvious conclusion is not that the Egyptians knew, having lived that long into the past, and they recorded, and so they built the pyramid based on that, because the evidence of the flood over the Giza pyramids is still available for us today. And so the Giza pyramids were built before the flood. And isn't it interesting that the Great Pyramid, you can see that the floodwaters didn't immerse the whole thing. There's a little capstone sticking up. The dry land above the waters. And so that's how you use science to correct the fake science, trying to justify the biblical traditions that are just completely way off base. And so, yes, there was a flood on the earth, and it did occur, but not in the 3000s BC. It was 10,500 BC. And as a result of the salt water onto Africa, that resulted in the Saharan desert. And so as Isis is pre-flood, she would have been in the jungle rather than the desert wilderness. But post-flood, different story. And so in the wilderness, she gives birth to Horus, Har, which means hawk. That's why he's personified as a hawk often. And the house of Horus, Hathor, is the mother of Horus, as she replaces Isis in facsimile number 3 of the Book of Abraham. She's the Queen Mother because the prince is getting coronated in facsimile 3. Not Ma'at, the servant, or not the servant, whatever, I can't remember. The person mixed it up. Whether it was Joseph or the transcriber or the print guy, somebody mixed them up. And so Isis is the wife role, Hathor is the mother role. And then Hathor has other roles concerning Ra and getting drunk and going on a killing spree of mankind as a cow. Holy cow, Batman. So yeah, cows come from, or the cows in India, as worshipped as gods, come from the Egyptians. The Egyptians migrated. We know this because DNA of those living in China, those who are Chinese, have Egyptian DNA in them. And so thus India got their worship of cows from the Apis bulls of Egypt, as they were considered deity symbolisms and representations. And the Apis bull corresponded with the coronations and the succession of coronations. And notice there's also a Bible story of Saul, who wants to worship God by the sacrifice of bulls rather than by being obedient, and loses his crown as it's passed on to David, the Christ David. All right. Speaking of David, Tawut, thought, or Thoth, depends on which country origin you're referring to, is doing the pronunciation of the names, because Egyptian had no vowels, and so big difference in that regard. And so Isis taught Horus all about his father being sacrificed and the rituals that became the temple rituals. Isis was the one who designed the temple after her husband, who had been murdered, who died, buried, resurrected, ascended, and all that. And so she's the one that's credited with the creation of the temple rituals, patterned after her husband, who was deceased. So she taught this to Horus, and then Thoth, who had been involved with Adam and Eve, as Eve was impregnated by Adam, but Heavenly Father Shu was ordered by Grand Heavenly Father Adam, Atum, though yes, phonetically the same as Adam, to keep them separated, even though there was no way to continue the genealogy any further if you don't let them breed. Nonetheless, Shu obeys and separates them, and thus the dividing of the waters from the waters and the dry land appear. But Nut doesn't give birth until Thoth steps in and says, "Hey, I got an idea here. We'll add 5 days to the calendar to make it 365 days, Notice Enoch, there's 365 days mentioned in there as he ascends to heaven, the whole city of Zion ascending to heaven after the assassination of Abel. And those extra 5 days allowed for the children to be born. The 5 children: Osiris, Set, Isis, Nephthys, and Horus, which is a different Horus depending on the story again. It's just used to fill the gap, to explain the calendar for the civil calendar. The religious calendar is a 360-day calendar. And so he taught him all about kingship, how to rule righteously, and how Horus could do battle to restore the throne. So Mother is all about religion, and Thoth is all about kingship, government. The 2 eyes of Horus are thus represented. The right eye is for government, and that is symbolized by the sun. The left eye for religion, symbolized by the moon. I'm wanting to jump ahead. I think we're ready for the confrontation. The death, the temple rituals, though. The first thing you do after recovering the body parts, assembling them together, you have to then wash the body. Body's already been baptized in water, but you have to do an actual ritual washing. That's different than baptism. And you're preparing the body for the afterlife, for the ascension. And then once you do that, then you mummify the body and anoint it. And put all sorts of spices, frankincense and such on the body. And the reason for anointing with oil is what the symbolism means with becoming a king. The washing part has to do with the Egyptian concept of a priest, which is righteousness, religion. So the religious ritual is performed to make a person a high priest through the washing of the body, and then you are anointing the body, crowning him as a king. So in the Mormon temples that Joseph Smith set up, you have the initiatories with the washing and anointing. Now we take the name of Christ upon ourselves. We are no longer willing, we now have taken it. We are now Christ, just like Osiris, as Horus, a child of Osiris, to succeed his throne. That's the purpose of the initiatory. There were no loyalty oaths in the ancient temples. That's the secret combination group who came up with that one. What? You haven't been watching my other videos? That Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball were a part of the Scottish Rites, which were infiltrated by the Illuminati, whose symbol is the inverted pentagram of Lucifer, the light bearer, the Illuminati. The ones who usurped the organization of Joseph by having him murdered. And Mormons are looking for a Mormon to succeed Joseph on as president of the church in the latter days. Huh. That's interesting, Travis. I never thought of that before. You haven't been watching my videos. Section 103, verse 16. And so, are we ready to get to the good stuff? No, we have to cover the judgment. Ma'at, who is mistaken as the prince, in facsimile number 3, she's the scale of judgment. You have to come to her first. And she's personified as feather on top of the scales sometimes. But you have the initiate's heart ripped out of his chest, plopped on one scale, and then a little light, fluffy feather on the other one, and the heart has to be lighter than the feather in order to pass. If you fail, Amanet, I believe is the name of the beast. That is a combination of multiple creatures. It's a hybrid creature. And so I'm sure they were tampering with DNA and gene splicing. But the person who fails is devoured. And they have in the tombs of the 19th dynasty, that's the ones that I have pictures of, where the person transforms into a pig, swine, and then goes back into the netherworld to wait for another resurrection opportunity. Remember, there are 3 resurrections, 3 kingdoms of glory? Huh. And also there's this story by Jesus. I don't know who he is. It's supposed to be Amen. But he encounters Legion. And Legion trembles and fears before Jesus and say, "Oh, please have mercy on us, O King of Kings, Lord of Lords." And he wants them cast out, and they say, "Oh, please let us possess these swine and show mercy on us." And so the Legion possesses the swine, and then they go berserk and run right into the Mediterranean Sea and die. That's spiritual death, with the failed judgment, taken right from the Egyptian story. And what an initiate has to do at Ma'at to restore order and peace, harmony, happiness in the universe because of the death of the king, so that you can succeed as the true successor to the throne, is you have to be able to recite the 42 affirmations. I have not built up an idol god. I have not worshipped other gods. I have not taken the name of God in vain. I have not dishonored my parents. I have not murdered. I have not... Yeah, one's missing, though, out of those 10 commandments, which are thou shalt nots. That's the Sabbath day, because that's a Babylonian thing. Babylon created a 7-day calendar, and because 7 was a superstitious bad luck number, the 7th day of the week, see, now we're identifying an anachronism in the Bible, aren't we? Was the day of rest. They didn't want people working on that day out of fear for a curse would come upon people if they were to violate the Sabbath day of rest on the 7th day. And So anything with a 7, you have to be very cautious to say, oh, okay, this is most likely a Babylonian influence that needs to be booted on out of the text. Not in all cases, but just pay attention to the number 7. Because flood story, for example, it has pairs, and then it's got 7s. Why are there 7s? Is it 1 male and 6 females? How does that work? Or is it 7 pairs so that it's actually 14? I think it's 7 pairs, actually. But yeah, it's Babylonian influence. Kick it out. Because the original understanding was the main family groups. I almost fell for it too. Christians got suckered into it by scientists who played them for chumps. Because scientists have created the categorization of kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So when scientists mock Christianity, saying there's no way Noah could fit on the dimensions given all species of animals, and Christians go, no, God is a God of miracles, he can do whatever he wants, and there was this, or they'd come up with, well, there weren't as many animals back then as there are now, whatever excuse they give, they fell for it. They went down the rabbit hole. Because you got to throw it back in their face and say, oh, you scientists, you know it's referring to the family groups. But they don't do that. They get triggered. And so, and again, the actual flood was 10,500 BC. Bit different. Alright, so then after you pass, your name is written in the book of life by Thoth, who is David, who is Adam, the Ancient of Days, and you are presented before the veil with Horus, who is escorting you at the veil, because it's Horus who is the true successor, and so Horus is represented at the veil with you. And you thus tell Osiris through the veil that you have passed and you have been washed and anointed to become hereafter a king and a queen, priest and a high priestess unto the Most High God, hereafter to rule and reign in the house of Israel forever. And then you are able to enter into the presence of God, being Christ, just as Osiris. And so it's an afterlife thing as well as it is an earthly thing. Like I said, petroglyphs are translated at multiple levels. And so each succession of a king is the afterlife symbol as well as the earthly symbol of the restoration of the earthly kingdom, not just the establishment of the heavenly kingdom. Okay, so I'm sort of going into the next part, so let's get to the battle. I hope you guys have caught on by now that the temple originated as burial coffins, mastabas, at first, and then they developed into stacked step pyramids, and then into the Giza pyramids, all symbolic of the mound that rises up between the waters, referring to the Messiah child, the birthright blessing son of the latter days, Horus. And thus why the original temples were designed in that pyramid structure. Later ones were not so much designed in that same manner. Akhenaten's was designed to face sunrise and thus have the sunlight enter into the gates. And so it's Aten, the horizon of Aten, so that the symbolism is maintained. And so now we get to the battle, and we see that battle in the book of Genesis, as well as other books, such as with Samson and Jesus of the Gospels. Though Jesus of the Gospels doesn't come out triumphant as the other story characters do from the Old Testament. And even others, the Greeks have their version, Romans had their version, and so on. Every culture has their comparable deities. And as Horus is ready to go back to Egypt, he's now an adult, no longer a baby, and so he's ready to take over on the throne. He treks back to Egypt, sort of like moves. We shall put this aside for right now while I deal with this. Finish up the video. And at the beginning of the battle, Horus gets his right eye and eventually his left eye plucked out. So if you know the Bible story of Samson gets tricked by Delilah, and he gets captured by the Philistines, and he's imprisoned, and then he's tied up to the temple pillars. Bruce Armaconki, the building, seriously, Bruce? The temple, and is blinded, and prays to God for final strength to take down as many Philistines as he can in this final act, as he tears down the temple and killing more Philistines in his death than in his life. That is a variation of the story. Technically, he is to take down the church. and in 3 days build it back up again. As that Jesus guy talked about, and his terrorist threat that got him arrested and murdered, but he didn't get murdered, he gave up his own life. You can't murder me, I murder you. And was accused of terrorism for that. So yes, there is the concept of the symbol for the Latter Days Horus that I've been going over in my playlists, that he is to be arrested, accused of being a terrorist. And what's also interesting is that there are these signs in the heavens for the latter days, and they refer even to, as in the days of Noah, so shall be in the latter days. Noah being Noah, and Noah is a descendant of Seth, who replaced Abel rather than Cain taking over the family business, the kingdom, and thus corresponds to the Egyptian story, but in a manner more faith-promoting for the Jewish author post-captivity. And so when you realize religion's involved and the collapse of a religion, and the final last days Christ coming from the apostate church, as Noah did, so also did Horus. As the battle involved the porridge incident of Jacob and Esau, where Jacob, which in Hebrew means usurper, usurped the birthright blessing son, or birthright, from Esau. And Esau, after losing his birthright, says, "You are rightly named." And then God then gives Jacob a new name of Israel. And yes, I know, Nelson butchered it so badly. Oh my goodness. If I didn't know that he was the false prophet for the latter days, and that he's from the Illuminati and working with Russia to destroy America, I would have empathy for how badly he butchered Israel in General Conference. When it's more than obvious, not just by the definition given in the passage, that it's Yah, Prince of God. Because he usurped the birthright and blessing, God then said, okay, the latter day Messiah will come through you, Yah, Prince of God, rather than through Esau. It was a softball question. He's the president of the church. He claims that he has the office of Moses, which is Yah, Prince of God, the Messiah, and thus the latter days Messiah is to be a man like Moses, the Jewish Messiah of Messiahs. That's why the Torah is the number one book of books for the Jews, because it's the books of Moses. And there Nelson was, humiliating himself, even claiming that he went to Hebrew scholars who told him that false information. Nonetheless, Horus, to win, as the contest was neck and neck, and Amun, the god Amun, was siding with Seth, He's the judge, and he was going to give it to Seth, and Horus was going to lose. So yes, Pharaoh kept saying, nope, nope, sorry Moses, nope, nope, not going to happen, nope. That's where that comes from. And so Horus then gives Set a salad with special sauce. It's not McDonald's special sauce for their Big Macs. And it's not porridge. And Set becomes impregnated and gives birth to a branch. So if you're familiar with the name for the latter-day Messiah as the branch, that's where that comes from. Also comes from Ezekiel, where Ezekiel talks about the Messiah, his origins coming from Osiris with the cedar of Lebanon, being plucked from the top, meaning the royalty line, and an eagle bringing it to another land. That other land we know because of astronomy, because of the Bible signs in the heavens, which came from the Egyptians. That's how old they are. Far older than Joel, who is the oldest that we know of, though we can probably say Barak. Can't remember if that's the right name or not. The one who was the king came to him and said, you need to curse the house of Israel, and paid him. And so he went to go curse the house of Israel, and God said, no, you're not going to curse the house of Israel. You're going to bless them, and you're going to talk about a star of Jacob, star of the usurper. And so nobody understands it because they don't know Egyptian. They don't understand how the Bible stories correspond to the Egyptian story. And so Horus was then able to show that he is the literal descendant of Set, and therefore is the birthright blessing son through Set to take over the kingdom. And so Amun says, okay, you win. And Set is banished, cast out into the desert Sahara, post-flood. And and Horus restores the kingdom, and such forth and forever for a millennial reign of peace. Restoring the Pride Lands, Simba, which came from a different African tale, which originated with that Egyptian story. And the astronomy part is very freaky, because, as I mentioned, right eye sun, left eye moon. To go blind refers to eclipses, solar, lunar eclipses. And solar is unique in that it's because of the moon getting in front of the sun. Whereas lunar, it's the earth getting in front of the moon, or the sun. Yeah, in front of the sun, casting a shadow on the moon. And the two eyes of Horus in Egyptian are the Egyptian word pronounced Peter by putting the vowels in, just random ease. So PTR, Peter, means seer. So to be blinded has multiple meanings, not just the literal blindness, but also spiritual blindness. As the Jesus character says that in the latter days there will be false prophets, false Christs, who will deceive. These are blinded prophets. And what's also interesting is that because it corresponds with solar eclipses and lunar eclipses, and because Ezekiel is talking about this Horus being transported to a different land for the latter days, in a land where there are trees similar to the cedars of Lebanon, where there is land with great lakes, great waters, and a land with mountains, so that he would move to the top of the mountains, all covered in the parable in Ezekiel. Isaiah tells us that a sign in the heaven of the conception and the birth of Ammon will take place. I give unto you a sign. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. He shall be named Emmanuel, Amen El, the God Amen. Matthew ignores that it's a sign, even takes sign out from his rewriting of it. Just starts with, a woman shall conceive and bear a son. And then changes the definition of Emmanuel to God with us, which is an anachronism for the author, exposing him as to when he wrote this. Because that definition was not in Paleo-Hebrew and is much later than post-captivity Hebrew. And yet John in Revelation chapter 12 corrects Matthew and adds more to it. So much more that the conjunction that John is talking about in Revelation 12 is a precise date. 23rd September 2017. That was the sign of the Son of Man. In that year, the Book of Mormon takes over and talks about a threat to America in metaphoric story code, talking about Jews in Jerusalem and Babylon coming in, conquering, removing the king of Judah, and placing on the throne a puppet king named Zedekiah. They don't go into that detail. You have to actually go to the footnotes and go to Jeremiah to learn of the behind-the-scenes story. And then Lehi has a combo dream, or a combo sign in the heavens in his dream from Revelation 12 and 19 with the white horse. The white horse is not mentioned in the Book of Mormon, but the man descending out of heaven. like the sun at noonday, Amen, and 12 stars following him. That's the sign on the 23rd September 2017, coming down from heaven, the death sign that John talks about, that the Book of Mormon talks about in 3 Nephi 11. Yeah, 3 Nephi 11 was not an actual event, because the Jesus gospel guy is not correct. It didn't exist. And so, why is the Book of Mormon talking about it? Because 1 Nephi chapter 1 verse 2, the learning of the Jews, the language of the Egyptians. You can't ignore that. You can't just say, I'm going to refuse to believe any of that and just stick with my Christian belief interpretation with Mormon twist. Can't do that. I've gone over how that is the case. But those dates correspond to the solar eclipses. The first one occurred 21st of August 2017, the first day of darkness. Moses, one of the plagues, 3 days of darkness. In the Book of Mormon, 3 days of darkness. After the third, sign of the Son of Man. Or not the sign of the Son of Man, sign of the death of the Son of Man. 8 April 2024. 7-year period of time. And so, yeah, the Son of Man, the Messiah, the man like Moses, Horus, is not born on the 23rd of September 2017. Notice Nephi is, because Lehi leaves in that first year, and then Nephi is born. Huh. And the 21st of August 2017 just happened to be the one and only time ever in all of recorded history when a total solar eclipse occurred on the ancient Egyptian religious calendar New Year. I had bought a book for that year that I saw on Amazon about the calendar of the Egyptians. I thought, oh, that'd be kind of cool to see, and went to that date, went, oh crap, no way. So yeah, the ancient Egyptians, in telling the story of Horus losing his eyes, going blind, was to be translated as the date for when the latter days was to occur. Thus the Bible all talked about it. Thus the Book of Mormon says everybody talked about it. That's what everybody's waiting for. That's what all the prophecies are all about. All the parables, all the stories with symbolism. That's what it's all for. And we're in it right now, right here, based on the temple rituals of the ancient Egyptians. That's what the temples were built for. Was for right now. And we're right in the middle of it. We just went through 2020 when it was planned to have the coronavirus. Remember Moses, the final plague, which then triggered the Exodus, a virus in Egypt. So we're in it. And it is freaky. Which means that the 3 days of darkness are the 3 total solar eclipses over America in this 7-year period. starting in 2017, 21st of August 2017, when Trump was put into office by Russia, and then ending 8 April 2024, when we'll have another presidential election. And so I'm kind of wondering if that's going to be the fulfillment, as if the next president in 2024 will be such, or if Benson is correct, that the Constitution will not be saved in Washington, and Zion is established in America from the ashes that we're about to go through with whether war or natural disasters. QAnon is still in shock right now that none of their prophecies came to pass, as Trump has been conquered by the deep state Dems. And so, yeah, it blows my mind away as how they knew the date. But when I did church history, oh, okay, they did it on purpose. The enemy. They purposely selected the Bible stories and the prophecies to mock it by fulfilling it for their end as the evil, knowing full well that there is no God, and thus destroy Christianity, as Albert Pike told Giuseppe Mazzini in his letter. But seriously, you're actually going to fulfill it and test and try the ancient Egyptians and make them accurate. Okay, good luck with that. So far you're winning. But this is the whole purpose for the temple rituals, is for this moment in time. Everybody has been waiting for this moment in time. That's why I've done all my videos. It's because I found out. And that's the whole purpose for the temple. Multiple levels of understanding, thus translation. But with the sacrament for Mormons, which I hope you're not going to church. Church is a super spreader. You're supposed to be following Moses and staying home, not following the false prophet who's left the churches open, left the temples open, sending people out on missions. But it was well prophesied that the people's hearts would grow cold and they would not hearken. Thus, they would not save their lives. They would rather die listening to a false prophet. Thus was prophesied. But that's the temple rituals. The sacrament, broken bread, members scattered, being gathered, partaking of the bread and wine, blood red. That's where vampirism came from, if you didn't know. They sort of took it a little too literally. But, yeah. The mounds, the pyramids, the land rising up, all about the child to succeed on the throne in the latter days, which they gave us the date. 2017 was when it was all gonna kick into action and conclude in 2024. Though John in Revelation 19 indicates that that's when he becomes the king officially and then goes out to conquer, to gather in the elect, rescue them, and defeat the enemies of the world. We don't have Zion built, so I'm sort of concerned about the Book of Mormon when it talks about two main instances, the Jaredites and the Nephites, whose kingdoms both were utterly destroyed. And that is a concern for the latter days, and that's what the enemy is counting on. They're not fulfilling biblical prophecy so that they can be conquered. But I think I've covered it. That's the temple rituals. That's what it's all about. It's about the last days Messiah. And Mormons, who were supposed to be saving the Constitution, saving America, following Captain Moroni, who went back to Zarahemla to deal with the kingmen who were trying to overthrow the government. And then in 3rd Nephi 7, when Jacob becomes king of the secret band of Gadianton, Jacob, usurper, they were going to try to have him conquer the Nephites and be placed as king over the Nephites, the kingmen, and he loses in that election. And then tucks tail and runs away. Yeah, we just had that happen, didn't we? But there was a coup attempt. It failed, even though there were casualties. But yeah, we still have destruction. They're saying that the waters above are such that it's indicating a heavy snowfall for this winter. So we'll see about that. It's going to kind of suck for me. I won't be able to run in the snow, as I wasn't able to do this morning. Alrighty.